Eli and Ethan were twin brothers who grew up in a small town where almost everyone knew each other, but very few cared about them. They were called pauper twins because they were poor, badly dressed, and often seen wandering the streets with tired faces. People could easily recognize them because they always walked together, side by side, as if they were afraid of being separated. The twins had lost their parents when they were very young. Their father died first, after falling sick during winter, and their mother passed away only a year later. No one in the town stepped forward to adopt the boys or take them into their homes. Maybe it was because they did not have enough money, or maybe because they simply didn't want the burden of two children. The only help the twins received was from a local charity, which sometimes gave them old clothes or leftover food. Most days, however, they had to survive on their own. Eli was quieter and more thoughtful. He liked to observe the world around him, the sound of birds, the movement of trees, and even the way people spoke to each other. Ethan, on the other hand, was more talkative and always tried to make jokes, even when life was difficult. He believed that if he could make his brother laugh, then things didn't feel so heavy. They were different in personality, but they understood each other better than anyone else. They did not need long conversations to communicate. Sometimes one look was enough. The twins lived in a small, abandoned shed near the outskirts of town. When it rained, water leaked through the roof, and they had to cover themselves with thin blankets to stay warm. In summer, the heat made it difficult to sleep. There was no electricity, no proper bed, and no running water. Every morning, they would wake up with stiff bodies, rub their eyes, and go out looking for ways to earn food or money. They became familiar faces at the local market, where they would help shopkeepers carry crates or clean the area in exchange for coins. But the work was never enough. Most days, they earned so little that they could only buy one meal, not two. They took turns eating. If there was only one piece of bread, Eli would say he wasn't hungry and give it to Ethan. Ethan would argue, of course, but eventually one of them would sacrifice for the other. It became normal to go to sleep hungry, stomachs growling painfully in the dark. Even though they were poor, the twins were not lazy. They were always searching for jobs, even small ones. They washed dishes in a tea shop, cleaned tables in a cafe, and sometimes helped old people carry groceries. But adults didn't always trust them. Many believed poor children were thieves or troublemakers, so they often avoided giving them work. Some shopkeepers would shout at them and tell them to leave. The twins would quietly walk away, embarrassed but not angry. They had learned to accept rejection. Despite the cruelty of the world around them, Eli and Ethan were not bitter. They were tired, yes, and sometimes worried that they would never escape poverty. But they still found small pieces of comfort in each other's company. They created small games to distract themselves. They talked about imaginary adventures, places they wanted to visit, and food they wished they could eat someday. In their minds, they were explorers, travelers, or even musicians performing on a grand stage. The twins had a special love for music, even though they barely had access to it. When they passed by houses with open windows, they would stop and listen if someone was playing the radio or a piano. They could stand there for minutes, just absorbing the melodies. It made them feel calm, as if the music was speaking directly to their hearts, telling them to hold on a little longer. One of their favorite memories was of their mother. Before she died, she used to play an old keyboard for them. It was missing some keys, and it made strange sounds sometimes, but the twins adored it. Their mother would sit with them every evening, teaching them small tunes. She wasn't a professional musician, but she had a natural ability to make beautiful melodies. The twins remembered how her fingers danced, how she hummed softly, and how her face looked peaceful while playing. It was the only time the house felt full of love. After she died, the keyboard was taken away, along with most of their belongings. But they never forgot the sound. Sometimes they would hum the melodies to each other, trying to remember every note. Music became their secret world, something no one could steal. Years passed and the twins continued their struggle. People in the town got used to seeing them around but never really cared to know their names or their story. They became part of the background, like stray animals wandering the streets. But the twins never forgot who they were. They knew they had a talent, even if no one could see it yet. Deep inside, they believed that life would change someday, that they would get a chance to show their worth. They didn't know when or how, but they held onto that hope tightly, because hope was the only thing that didn't cost money. And even in hunger, loneliness, and hardship, they stayed together, two thin boys walking side by side, united not just by blood, but by dreams the world didn't understand. Before their parents died, the twins' lives were very different from what they later became. They were still poor, but their small home was filled with warmth, laughter, and most importantly, music. Their mother had a strong love for music, especially piano. She didn't own a real piano, only an old second-hand keyboard with faded keys and wires showing at the back. Some keys were broken, others were out of tune, but to the twins it was priceless. Every evening when the sun started to set and the sky turned orange, their mother would sit on a small wooden chair, place the keyboard on her lap and play. The melodies were simple, not fancy, but they carried emotion. The twins would sit on the floor close to her feet, watching her fingers move like magic. Whenever she played, the world felt safer. The cold house, the hunger, the worries all disappeared for a while. Their mother believed music could heal sadness. She said, "When you feel lost, play. When life hurts, play. When you don't know what to say, let music speak for you." Eli took those words very seriously. He would watch every movement carefully, trying to memorize her hands, her rhythm, her softness. Ethan enjoyed the music in a different way. He didn't analyze it, he just felt it. He swayed his head, tapped his feet, and sometimes sang small melodies in a whispery voice. The twins learned to play without a book, without notes, and without lessons. Their mother didn't teach them formally. Instead, she encouraged them to imitate. "Listen first," she would say, "feel second, play third." So they did. They sat beside her, each taking turns to press the worn-out keys. At first, they made mistakes constantly, creating sounds that were messy and loud. But their mother never scolded them. She smiled and said, "Mistakes are part of music, just like mistakes are part of life." Slowly, they improved. They learned a few small songs and created their own melodies. They didn't know the names of chords or scales, but they knew how to make something beautiful with what they had. They didn't understand music theory, but they understood emotion. The most beautiful memory the twins carried was one night when their father was sick, coughing constantly. The house felt heavy with fear. Doctors were expensive, medicine was rare, and no one knew if he would survive. Their mother sat beside him and played a gentle lullaby on the keyboard. The twins joined in, playing the parts they remembered. Their father's breathing slowed, his face relaxed. For a few moments he looked peaceful, as if the music had pushed the sickness away, even if just temporarily. That night taught the twins something they never forgot. Music had the power to change how people felt, even in the darkest moments. But when their mother died, everything changed. The keyboard was taken away during a chaotic time when relatives and social workers came to collect belongings. The twins didn't understand the rules, but they knew they were too young to argue. They watched silently as the only object connecting them to happiness disappeared. They didn't cry loudly. They didn't beg. They just stood still, holding each other's shoulders, memorizing the sound of their loss. When the door closed and the keyboard was gone, the house felt empty in a way they had never experienced before. It wasn't just furniture missing, it was a piece of their identity. After that, their life became about survival. They looked for food, shelter, and work. Music became a memory, like a dream they once lived but couldn't repeat. They tried to hum the old songs, but without an instrument, it felt incomplete. Eli sometimes tapped his fingers on a table in the same pattern his mother used on the keys. Ethan sometimes whistled tunes they used to play. But these small attempts only reminded them of what they lost. People around them didn't know their musical past. They only saw dirty faces, messy hair, and thin bodies. No one imagined that these poor boys had once played melodies that could calm hearts. In the town, talent didn't matter unless you had money, instruments, or a teacher. The twins had none of those things, so their musical talent slowly faded like a candle running out of wax. Not because they stopped caring, but because life pushed them too hard in other directions. Still, sometimes at night, when hunger made it impossible to sleep, the twins whispered songs to each other. They didn't remember every note, but they remembered the feeling. They remembered their mother's words, "When you are lost, play." But what could they play with empty hands? Years passed and music became a secret memory. Something soft and hidden, locked deep in their hearts. They didn't talk about it, not because they forgot, but because remembering hurt too much. They believed that part of their life was gone forever, buried under hunger and struggle. What they didn't know was that life had not forgotten their gift. One day, fate would place them in front of a real piano, and the world would hear the music they carried inside since childhood, music that no poverty could erase. The days grew harder as the twins got older. Work did not get easier, food did not magically appear, and kindness did not suddenly become common. Instead, hunger became a regular companion, one that followed them everywhere from morning until night. Some days they woke up with stomachs so empty that it felt as if their insides were being squeezed. They tried drinking water to stop the pain, but water only made them feel more hollow. They learned to ignore it, like ignoring a noisy neighbor, but hunger was louder than anything else. Eli often tried to distract himself by thinking, planning, or finding small jobs early in the morning. Ethan tried to distract himself by making silly jokes, but jokes didn't fill stomachs and thoughts didn't stop weakness. Their bodies grew thin and fragile. Their clothes hung loosely on them and their cheeks looked sunken. They rarely smiled anymore except at each other, forcing small smiles to keep hope alive. One cold evening changed everything. It had been raining heavily all day. The streets were muddy, and people walked fast with umbrellas, not looking at anyone. The twins had spent hours outside trying to help shopkeepers close their stalls, hoping someone would pay them with coins or leftover food. But everyone said no, go away, because rain made people impatient and angry. By nightfall, they had nothing to eat, not even crumbs. Their fingers were numb from the cold and their lips trembled as they spoke. They sat under a small tin roof near the back of a building trying to stay dry. Their clothes were soaked anyway and they could see their breath in the air. They were tired, wet, and starving. Eli touched his stomach and whispered, "We have to eat something today." Ethan laughed weakly and said, "I wish we could eat the rain." They both knew there was no food waiting for them at the shed. They couldn't sleep with this level of hunger. It would only make them dizzy and sick by morning. They decided to go to the bakery, a place known for throwing away old bread at closing time. The bakery was warm inside, and the smell of fresh bread always made their stomachs twist painfully. They stood outside for a long time, staring through the window, watching customers buy pastries with casual hands, not knowing how lucky they were. For the twins, a single loaf of bread was not just food, it was survival. When the crowd inside began to thin, they walked in. Their clothes were dirty, their hair wet, and their faces pale. The bakery owner, a large man with a heavy voice, frowned immediately. He didn't like beggars inside his shop. He especially didn't like children who looked like trouble. "What do you want?" he said sharply, wiping his hands on a cloth. Ethan lowered his head, embarrassed. Eli stepped forward, gathering courage. "We're hungry," he said honestly. "Can we do something to earn bread?" The owner raised an eyebrow. He wasn't expecting manners, he was expecting demands. Most beggars simply asked for food or money without offering anything back. But these two were asking to work. That confused him. "What work can you even do?" he asked, almost laughing. "We can clean, wash dishes, sweep the floor," Eli replied. The owner shook his head. "I don't need help." Ethan looked around desperately, searching for something, anything that might change the man's mind. But the bakery was already clean and workers were finishing up. They turned to leave, their hearts heavy, but they stopped when they heard laughter from a table near the counter. A group of customers had been watching the twins the entire time. They whispered and snickered, judging their clothes, their hair, their desperation. One of them said loudly, "Look at them begging for bread. They probably just want money for nonsense." Another added, "Poor kids can do nothing. They'll always be useless." The twins didn't react. They were used to insults, but hunger made everything hurt more. As they walked back toward the door, they saw a cafe across the street. Through the window, they noticed something unexpected, an old, upright piano sitting in the corner. It wasn't shiny or modern, but it was real. Real keys, real pedals, real music waiting to happen. Eli stopped walking. His heart started racing. "Ethan," he whispered, pointing, "look." Ethan followed his gaze and his eyes widened. For a moment, they forgot their hunger, their wet clothes, their embarrassment. All they could see was the piano. Slowly, an idea formed inside Eli's mind, a bold, ridiculous idea. "What if," he said, barely breathing, "we play for bread?" Ethan stared at him, shocked. "Are you crazy? They'll laugh." "They already laughed," Eli replied. "But if we don't try, we'll go hungry." Ethan didn't argue. Hunger had destroyed fear. Music, though forgotten, was still in their blood. They walked back to the bakery owner, who was watching with crossed arms. Eli swallowed hard. "We can play piano," he said, voice shaking. "If we play, can we get a loaf of bread?" The owner burst into laughter, and so did the customers. The idea seemed too ridiculous, too dirty, starving kids claiming they could play an instrument better than adults. People whispered, stared, and smirked. The twins stood there, embarrassed, stomachs twisting, not just from hunger but from humiliation. Yet with nothing left to lose, they stayed silent, waiting for an answer, knowing that one simple loaf of bread could decide the rest of their night. And hunger had made them brave enough to ask for the impossible. After the laughter in the bakery, the twins didn't run away. They stood quietly, even though their ears burned with shame. Hunger had taken away their pride, but it had also given them courage. They were too weak to fight, too tired to argue, but they were strong enough to hope for one chance. The bakery owner wiped his eyes as he finished laughing. He looked at the twins as if they were foolish children telling a silly joke. "You too," he scoffed. "You think you can play piano?" Eli didn't look away. "Yes," he replied softly, almost whispering, "we can." Some of the customers leaned forward in their seats, curious. Others shook their heads, certain they were lying. In their minds, music belonged to educated people, those who had books, teachers, and proper training. It didn't belong to kids with dirty clothes and empty stomachs. The owner pointed to the cafe across the street. "That piano," he said, "it hasn't been touched in months. Even adults don't know how to play it." Ethan swallowed hard. "We can try," he said. His voice didn't sound confident, but it was honest. The owner stared at them for a long moment, thinking. He wasn't a cruel man, but he didn't like being fooled. He believed that poor kids often lied to get food, but there was something different about these two, something in their eyes that didn't look like greed. It looked like desperation mixed with belief. Finally, he waved his hand. "Fine," he said. "Go ahead, if you play something good, I'll give you a loaf of bread, but if you embarrass me in front of customers, you leave. Understand?" The twins nodded immediately, as if they had been waiting their whole lives for those words. One of the customers laughed loudly. "This is going to be fun, beggar music." Others smirked, whispering jokes, expecting a disaster. A few even pulled out their phones, ready to record the humiliation. For them, it was entertainment. For the twins, it was survival. They followed the owner across the street to the cafe. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still wet. The air smelled of wet soil and baked bread, and the street lights reflected on puddles like broken glass. The cafe owner, an older woman, looked surprised when the group entered. "What's all this?" she asked. The bakery owner grinned. "These boys say they can play your piano. Let's see what they've got." She looked at the twins with confusion. "They can play." "What?" Eli nodded, though his hands trembled slightly. The old woman shrugged. "If they break it, you pay." The bakery owner laughed. "Don't worry, they won't get close enough to break anything." Everyone settled around the piano. People from outside peeked in through the windows, curious. The cafe, usually quiet at night, suddenly felt like a stage. Chairs scraped, cups clinked, and voices buzzed. Some sat, eager to watch. Others stood, arms crossed, waiting to be entertained. The twins approached the piano slowly. Their shoes were muddy, their clothes damp, and their fingers stiff from the cold. The piano looked huge, old, and intimidating. Dust covered the surface, and a few keys were chipped, but to them it looked like treasure. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "Do you remember anything?" Eli nodded, though he wasn't fully sure. The memories were blurry, mixed with loss and time. But somewhere deep inside, their mother's melody still slept, waiting to be awakened. Before they could sit, someone in the audience shouted, "Hurry up, we don't have all night." Laughter followed. Ethan looked at his brother nervously. "They're waiting to laugh at us," he murmured. Eli took a breath. "Let them laugh, we just need bread." He slowly lifted the piano cover. The keys stared back at them, white, black, rough, and uneven. He ran his fingers lightly over them, feeling the cold surface. It felt unfamiliar and familiar at the same time, like meeting an old friend after years of silence. They sat down together, shoulder to shoulder. The bakery owner crossed his arms, smirking proudly as if he already knew they would fail. The cafe owner stood behind the counter, ready to complain if they made noise. Eli placed his fingers on the keys. Ethan followed, unsure but trusting. For a second, neither moved. Silence filled the room. They could hear whispers, mocking laughs, and impatient sighs. Eli closed his eyes, searching his memory. He remembered his mother's voice, soft and gentle, telling him, "Feel first, play second." "What?" So he felt, and then he pressed the first key. The sound was slightly out of tune, but it was music, raw, simple, real. They continued, one key at a time, slowly building a melody from memory. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't random. It had shape. It had heart. Ethan joined in, adding notes he remembered. Their fingers moved together, awkward at first, then smoother, as if the piano was recognizing them too. Slowly, the room fell silent. Conversations stopped, laughter faded, and faces changed. The audience leaned forward, listening, confused at first, then surprised. This wasn't noise, this was music. Not the polished kind played in fancy halls, but the kind that carried stories, sadness, and strength. The twins didn't look at the audience. They didn't look at each other. They just played, pulling the forgotten past into the present. And for the first time in a long time, people didn't see two starving boys. They saw something else, something they couldn't explain. Talent. Real, undeniable talent. What started as laughter turned into stunned silence. And all because two hungry boys asked to play piano in exchange for a loaf of bread. As the twins continued to play, the cafe was silent. Not because people respected them, but because nobody expected poor boys to know anything about music. In the beginning, people were simply surprised that the twins could produce a tune at all. But very quickly, that surprise turned into something else, discomfort. Some people didn't like being proven wrong. Before they started playing, many customers had made loud jokes, mocking their clothes, their thin bodies, and their bold claim. They expected fun, something to gossip about later, a funny story to tell friends. Two beggar boys pretended to play piano and failed miserably. But the moment the music began, the laughter stopped. The sound was soft, shaky at first, but emotional. It was not the polished music of a trained pianist, but it carried a kind of truth that forced people to listen. Even if they didn't want to, yet not everyone reacted with kindness. A young man sitting near the back whispered loudly to his friends, "They're just pressing random keys." His friends snickered. "Yeah, people are acting like this is something amazing. It's just because they're poor." What? People like them wanted the boys to fail because failure would make the world simple again. It would confirm what they believed, that poor kids were worthless, talentless, and unimportant. It was easier to laugh at weakness than to accept that talent existed in unexpected places. But then something changed in the melody. The twins, slowly gaining confidence, began to play faster, smoother. The song shifted from slow sadness to something brighter, almost hopeful. They didn't talk to each other, but their hands communicated. Eli played the main tune, gentle and emotional, while Ethan added soft harmonies, creating balance. The audience didn't know music terms, but they could feel the shift. People who had been watching lazily now leaned forward. Yet even while the music filled the room, humiliation still hung heavy around the twins. They could feel eyes on them, not all gentle or admiring. Some faces were sharp, judgmental, waiting for a mistake. A woman whispered to her friend, "This is so uncomfortable. Why are children in rags playing in a cafe?" Her friend replied, "They should be outside, not bothering people who came to relax." The twins heard it, they heard everything. Every whisper, every insult, every doubt. Their ears burned, but they didn't stop, they couldn't stop. If they stopped, they would not only lose the chance for food, but lose the last reminder of who they used to be. Ethan's hands shook for a moment, and he hit a wrong key. Immediately, laughter burst out from the same group of customers who had mocked them earlier. "There it is, I told you," someone exclaimed, clapping mockingly. The laughter cut through Ethan's chest like a knife. His face turned red and he quickly looked away, wanting to disappear. He almost lifted his hands from the keys, ready to stop. His appetite, his courage, his energy all disappeared in a second. But before he could move, Eli gently nudged his elbow. It was a small physical reminder, "Don't stop, not yet." Ethan took a shaky breath and continued. The crowd, realizing the boys were not giving up, felt something unexpected. Respect, maybe, or at least curiosity. It was clear now that the music wasn't luck or accident, it was memory. The twins were not pretending, they knew exactly what they were doing. But still, their appearance made some people uncomfortable. A child near the front asked loudly, "Why do they look so dirty?" His mother shushed him, embarrassed, but her face showed the same question. The twins didn't look like musicians, they looked like orphans. They smelled like rainwater and dirt. Their clothes were torn, their shoes mismatched. They did not belong in a cafe. They looked like people from another world, one filled with hunger, cold, and struggle. And that made the moment more intense, because it wasn't just music anymore. It was contradiction, something beautiful coming from something broken. Some people weren't sure how to feel. They didn't want to admit they were wrong for judging. Pride kept their faces stiff, their arms crossed. Others looked away because something about the boys reminded them of guilt. They realized they had walked past those same boys many times, ignoring them, pretending not to see. Eli and Ethan didn't know the complicated emotions happening around them. They only knew one thing: the more they played, the more the humiliation disappeared. Their music created a shield, thin, fragile, but real. Still, not everyone softened. A voice from the doorway called out sarcastically, "Hey, play something happy, you're making everyone depressed." Laughter followed again, but now something interesting happened. The laughter didn't spread like before. It sounded awkward, lonely. Some customers didn't join in, some frowned at the rude comment, some looked at the speaker with annoyance. The twins, without meaning to, had changed the room, because humiliation is easy when the victim is silent. But humiliation becomes uncomfortable when the victim responds, not with anger, not with aggression, but with talent, dignity, and unexpected skill. Eli and Ethan finished the final notes quietly. They didn't look up immediately, afraid of what they might see, more laughter, more insults, more rejection. But when they finally lifted their heads, they didn't see people laughing anymore. They saw eyes wide open, mouths slightly parted, hands frozen midair. And for the first time in a very long time, the twins realized something. People weren't laughing at them anymore. People were stunned. When the last echo of the previous song faded, the cafe felt strangely heavy, as if everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. The twins sat frozen at the piano, their hands hovering above the keys, unsure whether to continue or run away. Their hearts beat fast, partly from fear, partly from hunger, and partly from something they had not felt in a long time: hope. Eli, who usually thought too much before acting, closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't thinking about the audience anymore. He wasn't thinking about bread or humiliation or cold rain. He was thinking about his mother. He remembered her sitting on the old wooden chair, smiling. At his mother. He remembered her sitting on the old wooden chair, smiling. At them with tired eyes, teaching them a simple truth: music is not for impressing people. It is for healing hearts. He opened his eyes and looked at Ethan. Nothing was said, but Ethan understood. This time they would not play to survive. They would play to remember. Eli placed his fingers on the keys again, and this time the piano responded like it had been waiting for him. The sound was clearer, stronger, more emotional. Ethan followed, his confidence returning piece by piece, like a lost bird finding its way back home. They did not make a plan. They did not agree on a song. They simply let the music lead them, like walking down a familiar path in the dark. The first notes were soft and gentle, like rainfall. Then slowly the music grew louder, warmer. The melody was not complicated, but it was full of feeling. Some notes sounded sad, as if crying, and some notes sounded hopeful, as if laughing through tears. People who had been ready to mock earlier found themselves listening without meaning to. The piano was old, but in the twins' hands it felt alive. A few people blinked rapidly, confused by their own emotions. One man, who never cried in front of anyone, wiped the corner of his eye quickly and pretended he was just rubbing away dust. A woman who had judged the boys harshly earlier stared at the floor, ashamed of her thoughts. They had expected chaos, noise, or childish randomness. Instead, they were hearing something delicate, graceful, almost professional. But what made it astonishing was not perfection, it was heart. The twins played as if they were telling a story without speaking. A story of nights spent hungry. A story of a broken home. A story of a mother's love. A story of survival. Each note felt like a memory being released. Ethan, who was always clumsier than Eli, surprised everyone, including himself. His hands, though shaky at times, moved with purpose. He added small flourishes, small runs of notes, as if painting color onto Eli's melody. Together, they created a harmony that sounded richer than anything they had ever played on their mother's broken keyboard. People forgot that the boys were untrained. They forgot their clothes, their dirty faces, their thin bodies. All they could see were two musicians who understood each other so deeply, they didn't need words. They played faster now, fingers dancing across the keys with a confidence that seemed impossible for boys with no teacher. The room filled with sound, powerful, emotional, full of life. The cafe walls echoed the music, amplifying its effect. Some customers leaned forward unconsciously, their hearts pulled toward the sound. Even the bakery owner who had brought them their expecting entertainment felt his stomach drop. He had thought this was a joke. He had expected laughter, embarrassment, and maybe a dramatic conclusion. He did not expect artistry. For the first time, he wondered how many times he had walked past the twins without seeing them. How many times he had dismissed them as useless. How many times he had refused food to boys who carried something so rare. He wasn't the only one thinking that. People looked at each other awkwardly as if sharing guilt. When the music reached its peak, Eli and Ethan looked at one another, eyes bright, cheeks flushed. In that moment, they weren't starving children. They weren't outcasts, they were just two boys doing what they loved. The final notes came softly, slowly, like a whisper fading into the night. The last key was pressed gently, lovingly, as if saying goodbye. Silence followed. Not because the audience didn't know how to react, but because they couldn't. Their mouths were open, their hands frozen, their hearts too full. Ethan swallowed nervously, waiting for someone to speak. He expected laughter again or maybe criticism. But nobody spoke. They didn't clap, not because they didn't want to, but because they forgot how. The twins looked around confused. Eli felt his stomach twist, thinking they had failed. But then, like a gentle wave, it began. One person clapped, then another, then another. Soon the entire cafe was filled with applause, loud, passionate, emotional applause. Some stood up, some whistled, some wiped tears silently. People who laughed earlier now struggled to find words. The bakery owner slowly approached the twins, no trace of sarcasm left on his face. He didn't look like a man granting charity anymore. He looked like a man humbled. "Boys," he said quietly, "you've earned more than bread tonight." Eli and Ethan exchanged a stunned look. For the first time in a very long time, they didn't feel invisible. They didn't feel unwanted. They didn't feel like beggars, they felt seen. And they realized something beautiful. Sometimes the world doesn't need to believe in you for you to prove it wrong. At first, the applause sounded unreal to the twins. They had never heard so many people clapping for them. Their whole lives, when people noticed them, it was usually with anger, annoyance, or pity, not admiration. The twins sat frozen on the piano bench, unsure how to react. They looked at each other, silently asking, "Is this really happening?" The loudest clapping came from an older man sitting near the front. Just minutes earlier, he had been one of the people laughing at them. Now he stood up, eyes glistening, hands hitting together so hard his palms turned red. Others followed, forming an unexpected wave of appreciation. The bakery owner stepped forward first. His expression, which had been amused and smug earlier, now held something softer. He cleared his throat almost awkwardly because kindness didn't come naturally to him. "You boys, you've got real talent," he said. His voice did not carry the heavy joke it normally did. "I promised you a loaf of bread if you played something good. I'm going to keep that promise." Eli and Ethan nodded shyly, but before they could stand, he continued, "Not just one loaf. You can come to the bakery anytime you're hungry. I'll feed you. You don't have to beg." The twins stared at him, speechless. The idea of being able to eat without humiliating themselves, without digging through trash or begging strangers, felt unreal, like a dream they didn't trust yet. But the crowd wasn't finished. A woman in a neat coat walked up to the twins, placing a few coins on the piano. "This is for you," she said gently. "Buy something warm." Then another person stepped up, and another. Coins, small bills, and even packets of food were placed in front of them. A small pile formed, more money than the boys usually saved in a month. The kindness created confusion inside the twins' hearts. They were used to rejection, not generosity. They didn't know how to accept it comfortably. Part of them feared that this kindness would disappear as quickly as it appeared, but one of the most emotional moments came from someone who hadn't spoken at all earlier. A young mother walked over with her little daughter. The child held a small chocolate bar in her hand, half-eaten, wrapped in messy foil. She looked up at her mother and the mother nodded. The girl then stretched her hand forward toward Ethan. "It tastes good," she said shyly. "You can have it." Ethan froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone offered him food without expecting anything back, and certainly not a child. His throat hurt from holding back tears. He accepted the chocolate slowly, holding it as if it were gold. The mother whispered, "Thank you for the music." It made her smile. The twins didn't know how to respond, so they just smiled awkwardly. The crowd continued to talk, this time not about mocking them but about their music, about how surprising it was, how emotional it was, how unbelievable it was that two boys with no education could play so beautifully. "They should be in school," someone said. "They deserve lessons," another added. "They deserve a chance," a third voice said. It was ironic. Minutes before, these same people wouldn't have given the boys a second glance. Now they were discussing their future as if they mattered. But guilt also spread among the adults. One man whispered to his wife, "I've walked past them so many times, I always thought they were useless." His wife nodded, ashamed. "Maybe we were wrongs." The bakery owner returned with a large loaf of bread, still warm. He handed it to Eli with a respectful nod. The twins smelled the bread and almost felt dizzy. Freshly baked bread, soft, warm, and theirs. Not stolen, not begged for, earned. But the most surprising reaction came from the cafe owner, who usually hated noise in her shop. She approached the twins with slow, steady steps. "You boys ever had lessons?" she asked. "No," Eli answered. "You ever want to learn?" she asked. The twins exchanged a confused glance. Want to learn? Of course they did, but they never thought it was possible. Music lessons cost money, time, and a life they didn't have. "We don't have money," Ethan said softly, embarrassed. The woman shook her head. "I didn't ask for money, I asked if you want to learn." The boys stared at her, unable to speak. "If you want," she continued, "I can talk to a friend of mine. He teaches piano, he might help." Ethan's voice cracked. "Why would he help us?" She looked them in the eyes, because talent should not be wasted. The twins felt something shift inside them, something powerful and new. Not hunger, not fear, but possibility. People continued to talk, crowd around them, ask questions, give compliments, offer food and money. For so long, their days were full of silence, emptiness, and coldness. Now suddenly they were surrounded by warmth, not the warmth of fire or blankets, but the warmth of human hearts. Eli held the bread tightly. Ethan held the chocolate bar close. They had played for food but received much more than food. They received dignity, and they discovered something important. Sometimes a single moment of courage can melt years of cruelty in a few minutes. The world that had ignored them, judged them, and laughed at them was now cheering for them. A turn of hearts had happened. Not because the twins begged for kindness, but because they earned respect through something that came naturally from their souls. After the crowd slowly left the cafe, the twins remained seated at the piano, unsure of what to do next. The room felt quieter now, almost peaceful, as if the piano itself was resting after speaking for them. Eli held the loaf of bread tightly, while Ethan kept the chocolate bar in his lap, still unreadable with shock. For the first time in a long time, they weren't thinking about where to sleep, what to eat, or how to survive the night. They were thinking about the music they had just played, the applause they had received, and the strange kindness that had followed. Everything felt unreal, like they had stepped into someone else's life for a moment. The bakery owner stood at the door waiting for them. "Come on," he said, "I'll walk you home." The twins hesitated. They didn't have a real home, only a small broken shed. They were embarrassed, afraid he would judge them again if he saw how they lived. But he wasn't asking to see their house, he simply wanted to walk them safely through the dark streets, so they followed him. The streets looked different that night. They were still empty, still wet, but they didn't feel threatening anymore. It was as if the world had softened its claws. Eli carried the bread carefully, afraid to drop even a crumb. Ethan walked quietly, unusually calm. Halfway down the road, the bakery owner paused. "Listen," he said, "I wasn't kind before, I know that, but sometimes people don't realize what others are going through until they see something amazing." The twins didn't answer. They didn't know how to respond to honesty. He continued, "Come tomorrow morning. I'll make sure you get breakfast, not leftovers, real food." Ethan's eyes widened. Breakfast felt like a rich man's promise. They thanked him softly, and he left, leaving them with the stars, the dark road, and a loaf of fresh bread that smelled of comfort. When they reached the shed, they sat down and ate slowly, carefully. Every bite tasted like heaven. They shared equally, not rushing, not fighting, just enjoying something warm in their empty stomachs. Ethan broke off a small piece of chocolate and saved it for later, not because he was greedy, but because he wanted to prolong the happiness. After eating, they lay back staring at the cracked ceiling. Their bodies were tired, but their minds were awake. Eli whispered, "Do you think people will forget tomorrow?" Ethan stared up thoughtful, "Maybe, but maybe someone won't." Both of them knew that kindness could disappear quickly. They had seen people change moods fast, but there had been something different tonight, something deep, something lasting. The next morning, the cafe owner's friend arrived. His name was Mr. Collins, an older man with white hair and glasses that made him look gentle. He had heard about the boys from the cafe owner and wanted to see them play for himself. The twins were nervous, terrified really. Performing in front of a crowd was one thing, they didn't know those people and they didn't care what they thought. But performing for a musician felt different, scarier, heavier. Mr. Collins sat at the piano, tapping the keys softly. "Play something," he said kindly, "anything you remember." Eli and Ethan exchanged nervous glances, then sat together and played the same melody they had played the night before. But now the cafe was empty, and the music sounded smaller, shy, almost fragile. Their hands trembled, unsure if they were good enough. Halfway through, Mr. Collins lifted his hand to stop them. The twins froze, thinking he was disappointed, but instead of criticizing, he smiled. "You boys have something special," he said. "You don't know the names of the notes, you don't know sheet music, you don't know technique, but you know feeling. And that's rare." The twins listened silently, not sure if his words were praise or pity. He continued, "If you want, I can teach you. Not for money, not as charity, but because your talent deserves a chance to grow." Eli's mouth opened slightly. Ethan blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Nobody had ever spoken to them like that, not as beggars, not as burdens, but as people with potential. They said yes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, grateful yes. And from that day onward, their lives began to change, not magically, not perfectly, but slowly, step by step. They came to the bakery every morning not as beggars, but as welcomed guests. They practiced piano after closing hours, learning new notes and songs. They still lived in the shed, still struggled, still had empty days, but they now had something powerful, a direction. Eli became more focused, serious about every lesson. Ethan, who was always more emotional, learned to express feelings through music in a way that surprised even Mr. Collins. People in town began to talk, not with mockery but with curiosity. "Have you heard the twins play? They're getting better. They might have a future." At night, the twins still lay under the leaking roof, but they didn't feel abandoned anymore. The world had shown them that talent could open doors, even if they were poor, even if they were invisible. They didn't dream of fame or money. They dreamed of surviving with dignity, of making music that meant something, of proving that a past filled with hunger didn't have to decide their future. Their story didn't end with applause. It began with it. Because sometimes all a person needs is one moment, where the world stops laughing and starts listening, stops laughing and starts listening.